The phone buzzed again in my trembling hand, and through the blur of tears and rain streaking down my face, I saw his name on the screen, Liam. My heart twisted. He wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow. We had kept our marriage quiet, mostly because my family didn't think he was the right kind of wealthy. He had worked for every cent, unlike the generational snobbery my family worshipped. I hesitated, soaked to the bone, mascara bleeding into my eyes, fingers freezing around my purse as thunder cracked overhead. I pressed the green button. "Are you okay?" His voice came through like sunlight in a storm. I couldn't speak. All I managed was a pathetic, broken sob. "Where are you?" he asked, instantly alert. I told him how they humiliated me. How they kicked me out in front of strangers like I was nothing. How my mother whispered, "This is what happens when you marry trash." Silence. Then calmly, in that voice that always made me feel safe, he said, "Stay right there." I stood at the edge of the long driveway, shivering violently as the gates closed behind me. Cars drove past slowly, splashing cold water as they exited the estate, their passengers peering curiously at the drenched woman who'd just been exiled from her own family's celebration. No one offered a ride. No umbrella. Just stares. The world felt cruel and empty, until I heard the engine. His car. His custom midnight blue Bentley with tinted windows and the unmistakable growl that silenced everything else. It didn't stop at the curb. It roared past the gate, right back into the estate. Right through the security guard who fumbled to protest. The car stopped at the very steps they had thrown me off, and then the door opened slowly. Liam stepped out, drenched, furious, beautiful in his rage. And in that moment, every eye in the party turned to us. He looked at me like I was the only one who mattered. Like I was home. And then, in front of my entire family, he said, "Get in the car, baby. Let's show 'em what a mistake they made." The next morning arrived in a haze of grey light seeping through silk curtains, the storm outside reduced to a misty drizzle as if even the sky was exhausted from the chaos of the previous night. I woke up in the guest suite, not because Liam and I had fought, but because he thought I might need space to breathe, to be with my thoughts, unburdened by the weight of anyone else's expectations. On the nightstand sat a silver tray with a teacup, a handwritten note in Liam's crisp script that simply read, "You are loved. Come find me when you're ready." That single line shattered whatever numbness remained in me. I walked barefoot across the warm wooden floors, each step grounding me in the reality that I was no longer obligated to return to people who weaponized love as leverage. The mansion was quiet, except for the gentle clatter of dishes being cleaned somewhere far off and the occasional sound of wind whispering against the tall windows. I wandered into the library, not out of curiosity but instinct, because peace often hides between bookshelves, and I was desperate to find it. And there he was, Liam, still in his robe, seated on the deep leather couch, sipping coffee while reading a weathered copy of a biography he loved. He looked up, his expression softening instantly when he saw me. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I sat beside him, our shoulders touching, our silence speaking louder than any words could. "Lighter," I replied, and he nodded. But beneath that answer was a storm I wasn't ready to voice, because even though I was free from their house, I hadn't yet escaped the damage their years of emotional erosion had left behind. I told Liam I needed to go back, not to return to them, but to face them one final time. Not for closure, not for revenge, but for myself. Because healing, I had come to learn, wasn't about forgetting the pain, it was about reclaiming the power they took from me and standing tall in the wreckage they once tried to bury me under. The days that followed were filled with a kind of peace I didn't recognize at first. I kept waiting for the guilt to creep in, for the regret to whisper in my ear like it had so many times before after I stood up for myself. But this time, silence. No shame, no trembling apologies drafted in my head for things I didn't do. Instead, I took long walks in the garden with Liam, where the sun broke through trees and spilled across the stone path like golden validation. I laughed louder. I cooked again. I read books I'd abandoned years ago because I was too busy pretending to be perfect. Meanwhile, my family tried to reach out, not with apologies, of course, but with carefully worded texts like, "Let's not let one bad night erase all the good memories." I stared at those messages, feeling the weight of their hypocrisy, and deleted each one. I didn't owe them a response. Their version of good memories was rooted in my silence, my compliance, my invisibility. That was no longer the version I accepted. Liam stood by me through it all, encouraging my newfound clarity. "You don't have to go back to who you were," he said one night, as we watched a storm roll in from the balcony, lightning slicing the sky like a cleansing blade. "Let them sit in their discomfort. You're finally standing in your truth." I knew then that I wasn't just healing, I was evolving. And as the thunder rumbled in the distance, I welcomed it. Because storms don't scare me anymore. They remind me I survived one. The days that followed brought a strange calm, the kind that comes not from silence, but from resolution. I began documenting my story, not out of spite, but to help others who had once felt voiceless in their own families. I was invited to speak at women's empowerment conferences, share my experiences on podcasts, and eventually write a memoir. Through it all, Liam stood by me, not as a rescuer, but as a partner, constantly reminding me that my power had always been mine. The mansion, once a symbol of what I thought I needed to prove my worth, transformed into a haven for my new beginning. I started a non-profit that offered shelter, legal aid, and therapy to women abandoned or emotionally abused by their families. Strangely, it wasn't hate that drove me anymore, it was healing. One rainy evening, almost a year after the party, I received a letter from my mother. It wasn't an apology, it was a request for money. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked outside, barefoot in the wet grass, letting the rain soak through my dress. I laughed softly, not bitterly, but freely. I had been thrown out into a storm with nothing but my own heart, and now I stood in the rain again, by choice, unafraid, unashamed, unshaken. Because I had learned that sometimes, the greatest mansion you'll ever walk into is the one you build within yourself, one room at a time, with every boundary you honor, every voice you reclaim, and every storm you survive. That night, after my sister had finally fallen asleep in the guest wing, her first peaceful rest in what seemed like years, I stood on the balcony of our master suite, watching the rain drizzle faintly across the mansion grounds. The once violent storm had softened to a whisper, much like the chaos within me. My husband joined me quietly, wrapping a warm shawl around my shoulders without a word, his presence anchoring me the way he always had, without demand, without expectation. "You did the right thing," he finally said, his voice low and steady. She needed someone to catch her before she hit the bottom. I didn't respond right away. I was still processing the layers of betrayal, grief, and oddly enough, relief. For so long, I had believed I was the black sheep of my family, the only one shunned for refusing to bow to their perfectionist ideals. But now, knowing my sister had endured her own hidden torment, I realized we had both been wearing masks crafted by the same sculptors, our parents. I leaned my head on my husband's shoulder, letting the silence stretch between us. "What if they come back?" I whispered. "What if they try to twist this too?" He turned to face me, his eyes fierce yet loving. Then we shut the door again. "This is your home. They had their chance to make you feel safe, to celebrate your life instead of control it. If they come back, it will be on your terms, not theirs." I nodded slowly, feeling a strength rise within me that I hadn't recognized before, a power rooted not in anger or rebellion, but in clarity. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their cruelty, I was building something better. The next morning, I made a decision that would redefine everything. I called the event manager who still had the guest list from the party, and I arranged a new gathering, this time not in their honor, but mine. I sent out invitations to every friend, every mentor, every soul who had lifted me up when my own family tried to tear me down. And this time, the party would be at my mansion, my home, surrounded not by expectations and judgment, but by gratitude and truth. As the calls went out and replies poured in, I sat down at my grand dining table, now illuminated by golden morning light, and began writing something I thought I'd never write, a letter to my parents. Not to beg, not to explain, but to release. A final message not of revenge, but of resolve. I would no longer be the girl in the rain begging to be seen. I was the woman who had built her own roof, opened her own doors, and stood unshaken in the storm. After the melody faded and the guests stood in quiet awe, something shifted within me, not a sudden jolt, but a gentle unraveling of chains I didn't realize I was still dragging. I sat there at the piano, surrounded not by luxury or opulence, but by warmth and intention. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely aligned with myself. No longer performing, no longer chasing approval, just existing in truth. When the last note fell into silence, the applause wasn't thunderous or performative, it was sincere. I looked up to see tears in the eyes of a young girl in the corner, someone I'd never met. Later she'd tell me that she was kicked out by her own parents when she came out, that she'd been couch hopping for months, and tonight was the first time she felt like maybe she still belonged somewhere in this world. That single moment anchored me. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a bridge for others to walk across, to reach the place they thought was unreachable. I made a silent vow then, to never close the door I once had to break through. My mansion wouldn't just be a symbol of survival or love, it would be a shelter. A sanctuary. And so, over the coming weeks, my husband and I began plans to convert one of our guest wings into a non-profit safe space for women and LGBTQ+ youth escaping toxic families. It wasn't charity. It was solidarity. The media tried to spin it into a billionaire's wife turns activist narrative, but I ignored the noise. I didn't need a headline, I needed impact. When I told my family about the foundation, they sent a shallow message of congratulations with veiled sarcasm, as though I'd only done it for revenge. But I had stopped waiting for them to understand. I didn't need their recognition, because I had something more powerful, freedom. And I was finally ready to share it.